Hello. Today we are doing punctuation, as we always do on Tuesdays. And this week's punctuation lesson, we are looking at hyphens, dashes, and ellipses. Hyphens, dashes, and ellipses. So let's actually start with dashes. Dashes are longer than hyphens. Hyphens are short. Dashes are like twice as long. Just a line. Um, for both dashes and hyphens, you don't put a space on either end, um, even though at times I really want to. It looks wrong to me sometimes, but that's the way it is meant to be. So it's a line with no space before or after. If it's short, it's a hyphen. If it's long, it's a dash. Okay. So dashes, when do we use them? Well, with commas, we talked about how if you have part of your sentence that is not necessary, but clarifies the rest of the sentence or adds some information to the rest of the sentence, then you can set it off with a comma before and after, right? Well, what if that information has commas in it already? Remember, we don't want to use commas for two things at the same time. It's confusing. So, if what you want to add, for instance, is a list is going to be separated with commas. So you don't want to introduce and conclude it with commas. That will just be way too many commas and will be confusing. So you use dashes in that sense. So, the food I got at the grocery store, dash, apples, comma, oranges, comma, and kumquats, dash, was all rotten when I got home. It's an example of using the dash to add information that clarifies the rest of the sentence, but is not technically necessary. But it's got commas in it, so you use dashes instead of commas around it. Does that make sense? I know you can't answer me. This is where I wish we were in the classroom. But yeah, I'll go over that again. So, information that is not necessary but clarifies or adds to the sentence. Normally, we're going to do that with commas on either end of the information. But if there are commas in that part in the middle that you're adding, then you have to use dashes. The fruit that I got at the grocery store, dash, apples, comma, oranges, comma, and kumquats, dash, was rotten when I got home. You can also use dashes around something to emphasize it. Um, Parentheses, we haven't talked about parentheses, have we? But parentheses, um, they take something that's really not necessary and they put it in parentheses, and that means, don't pay as much attention to this. It's not that important as the rest of the sentence. Well, dashes say the opposite. They say, pay attention to this. This is the important part of the sentence. Example: my teacher, dash, who is never on time, dash, was late again. So it's important that your teacher is never on time. You want to draw attention to that so that the ending of the sentence makes sense in context. So my teacher, dash, who is never on time, dash, was late. And the third and last one we're going to talk about for dashes is in dialogue. If you're using a dash in dialogue, so when people are speaking, it's in between quotation marks, it's dialogue. If they break off suddenly, you put a dash inside the quotation marks. So, oh, I was going to tell you that dash, end of quotations. They forgot what they wanted to tell you, so they broke off speaking. So you use a dash there. You can also use it if they're being interrupted. So if it's, oh, I forgot to tell you, and then another character jumps in and says, I don't care what you have to tell me, then again, you'd use a dash at the end of, I forgot to tell you. So that's dashes. No spaces around them. It's a longer line than a hyphen. You want to use it to add emphasis. You can use it in dialogue, and you can use it around unnecessary phrases or even clauses that have commas in them already. Next, we're going to talk about hyphens. Hyphens are about half the size of a dash, so they're a short straight line, and their main purpose is to glue words together. So if you want to stick two words together, you're going to do it with a hyphen. Again, there's no space before or after a hyphen. So what we call compound adjectives is when you're mostly going to use hyphens. So what's a compound adjective? Well, we know an adjective is something that modifies, explains, adds to a noun, an adjective, right? Like the red dog or the wet sidewalk. Red and wet would be adjectives. But sometimes you have compound adjectives. That means that it's an adjective made up of more than one word. So, the on the run criminal, on the run, is being used as one idea there. So you'd hyphenate it to make it one compound adjective, on the run. The on the run criminal knocked over a grocery store or whatever. Um, Sometimes when the adverb is very, like the adverb very, or if an adverb ends in ly, you don't need to use a hyphen. Like the very tall tree, you would not put a hyphen between very and tall. The clearly full room had no more seats left. So you would not put a hyphen between clearly and full, even though, it satisfies the requirements of putting a hyphen in, but because it ends in ly, clearly, then you just don't need the hyphen. It's just one of those weird English rules. So, compound adjectives, which are really an adverb and an adjective stuck together. You want to use it in compound numbers as well. What's a compound number? It's a number made up of two or more words. So anything between 21 and 99 is a compound number. So 20-1, 90-9. You write all those numbers with a hyphen in the middle. And finally, just like with commas, you can use them some discretionary hyphens, but that's not usually it's not usually a good idea. Like when in doubt, don't use one, I would say. Same thing with the dashes. Dashes and hyphens, if you put too many of them in, then it just looks cluttered and confusing and it reads really broken up. And yeah, that just can ruin the whole passage. So be careful with your discretion. You're making a wise choice, discretion. So discretionary use of dashes and hyphens, I would say don't do it. But there are instances maybe where you might want to. Maybe ask someone before you do, or if you're on your own, you can look it up. A great website, by the way, is grammarbook.com. Grammarbook. grammarbook.com. And finally, we're talking about ellipses. So an ellipsis, which is the singular version of ellipses, which is a plural word, an ellipsis is the 3 dots you see. You see that a lot of places. Sometimes, depending what client you're using, in your email, there'll be 3 dots at the bottom that you can press to see more, right? So that's an ellipsis. And more than one of them is called an ellipses. Or ellipses, not an ellipses. 2 ellipses, 3 ellipses. So when do you use an ellipsis? Usually when you're quoting something, but you leave out part of the quote because you want to just jump to the main idea, or they ramble in the middle, or what they say in the middle is not important to what you're trying to show. So anytime you leave out something from a quote, you use an ellipsis in place of that. And now, again, it's discretionary whether you want to put a space before or after an ellipsis. There's no rule about that. That's just personal preference, whether you put spaces around an ellipsis or not. I don't, but other people do, and that's fine. Another way you can use ellipsis or ellipses are in dialogue. Again, if something's in quotation marks, it's dialogue. And if someone's hesitating, pausing for a really long time, or the sentence sort of trails off before it's finished, then you would use an ellipsis. So you could, in that sentence I just said, so ellipsis, you could, because I paused there for a long time. Also, if it trails off, so we could go back to the example of, oh, I forgot to tell you. If it doesn't break off suddenly, like we did with the dash, it could trail off. Oh, I forgot to tell you. Then you'd use an ellipsis. I forgot to tell you something, right? I forgot to tell you. You could even put something in there after the ellipsis. I forgot to tell you, ellipsis, something, but I forgot. Okay, great. There are, I think, only 3 IXL skills that we're going to look at this week with that, one for each of them. And yeah, I think you'll do great. So, that's punctuation for this week. Have a great day.